Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Hey guys, we're your hosts, Em and Jay, and today we wanted to give our thoughts on Nubia, Real One, a new graphic novel by DC. Nubia is a superhero that was introduced in the 1970s. She's the twin sister of Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman. They were both sculpted out of clay by Hippolyta, but then Nubia was kidnapped by Ares, and he ended up raising her to be against Diana, but they're able to overcome him, and Nubia can take control of her own destiny. Despite her being introduced decades ago, DC hasn't done much with her, which is a shame because she's an interesting character with a lot of potential, so it's nice to see her get the spotlight, and DC has more planned with her coming soon. But this graphic novel misses the mark on reintroducing her character. It's more about current events and politics, and Nubia's name happens to be on the cover. It just feels like instead of adapting this character, they're using her to comment on the current political climate, but if you replaced her with another character, things wouldn't really change much. It doesn't even feel like the DC universe. Even when Wonder Woman shows up, nothing really changes. She just shows up for a scene and then leaves. Plus the politics are extremely heavy-handed. They're clearly prioritizing their agenda over everything else, and I'm not sure if they're thinking through the situations they're putting their characters in, because oftentimes they come off as unrealistic. It's all very, we live in a society. Every white person in the book is completely irredeemable and over-the-top racist, and the book makes these sweeping generalized statements, and it basically assumes that these are universal experiences, but these are very serious subjects, and the comic just doesn't handle them with the maturity that's required. The book is probably longer than it needs to be. It's over 200 pages, and most of it is characters standing around talking before moving on to the next set piece, so needless to say the pacing isn't great. I think a lot of the dialogue could have been cut down to tighten up the story. That could have helped it flow better. Also, the book is marketed as YA, but I think it would fit better in the new adult category, considering the kind of content it has, which include things like school shootings and police brutality, along with sexual assault. I really don't like the art or coloring in this book. Everything ends up blending together. They usually use one color for the backgrounds, and I think they were trying to make the characters stand out against the background, but it's just not working. And I think they're trying to go for a cartoony art style, but it's just not flattering. The cover of this book is just Nubia sitting looking kind of smug, wearing a Wonder Woman tee with her bracelets. I just feel like since this is Nubia's reintroduction to DC, that maybe they could have had more fun with the cover, like a more action-packed cover. I do like her nails though, that's fun. The book follows Nubia, a 17-year-old high school student. She has superpowers, but instead of training to become a superhero like I would imagine a lot of kids would in the DC universe, since superheroes are relatively normal, but for some reason she seems to be living under the superhero relocation program from The Incredibles, because she's never allowed to use her powers ever, and if anyone finds out, she and her family have to pick up and move. Someone called D erases any video that might exist of the incident and ties up any loose ends while her family relocates. She never gets any training for her superpowers, which is a problem because superpowers can be dangerous, and if someone does have them, they really need to know how to use them. Instead, everyone's just ignoring it, so it's not surprising she'd get into trouble. For example, she ends up witnessing a robbery when she's at a convenience store, and at first she does try to lay low and keep out of trouble, but one of the robbers threatens her crush, which makes her get up and try to stop it. But she ends up doing that by picking up an ATM and throwing it right into the robber. This really should have killed him. He's robbing a convenience store, which does put his life at risk. But did Nubia mean to use deadly force? If she was getting training, she could learn how to control her powers, and maybe she could use them without revealing herself. Not to mention the property damage. She ripped an ATM out of the ground and then threw it at a guy, and it crashed. She probably could have snuck up behind him and knocked him out, and then quietly gone for the other guy. Loudly revealing her presence and then throwing an ATM is really conspicuous. But she's just a kid and she would have known that if someone had trained her. I know this book is about society's failings, specifically racism, but I think the Amazons are failing her too. It turns out one of her moms is an Amazon, which is why Nubia was left with her. Since she left Themyscira, she can't go back, even if she had no choice. So this way she could still be with the Amazons even if she can't go home. But for some reason, her parents aren't training her. I thought Amazons were all about training. I get they want to live a normal life, but it's clear her powers are causing her to get into trouble. It's not like they're gonna go away if you ignore them. And Diana isn't doing much better. She has no relationship with her sister, and she doesn't seem to care to. When they do finally meet, she tells her backstory and then gives her some bracelets, which is great. Since she's an Amazon, she should have had those by now. But then she just leaves and doesn't even bother training her to use them. And I don't don't understand why. She could spend time with her sister and teach her the way of the Amazons, but I guess she has more important things to do than train and support her twin sister. Instead, her family is just leaving her to suffer. She's not even allowed to hang out with other superpowered teens like the Teen Titans. Instead, she's stuck living in the Incredibles universe when everybody else is living in the DC universe. Ironically, it's like how DC mostly forgot about this character and only occasionally mentions her in the past 40 years. By the looks of it, this town could use a superhero. There's a lot of crime in a very short amount of time. Before the events of the book, there's a shooting which causes the police to respond. They end up cornering and questioning some kid who was in the area. He gets scared and runs, and he gets shot in the back. And we never find out if the actual culprits get caught. Then at the beginning of the book, there's a robbery at the convenience store. And then towards the end of the book, there's a school shooting. The police are clearly failing, criminals don't seem to be scared of them, and they're just making it worse. Nubia's friend says it's ridiculous to rob a convenience store when there's superheroes around, but we never see any superheroes, except for when Wonder Woman shows up to give Nubia her backstory and then leaves. So maybe Nubia could be this town's hero. Maybe having a hero could have a positive impact. The book unfortunately plays into a lot of stereotypes, and it gets to a point where the characters don't really feel three-dimensional or fleshed out, particularly with the villain. He starts out as your typical rich entitled punk who throws money around to keep himself and his friends out of trouble, but ends up devolving into a psychopath who ends up shooting up the school, and it doesn't come off as believable. Ironically, despite the comic's length, things don't really develop naturally. The pacing's really slow until it gets to an action set piece, then things go a little too fast. It starts when he has a crush on Nubia's friend and tries to ask her out to a party, but she rejects him because he's known for being a jerk. Then at said party, he gets drunk and forcibly kisses her, causing Nubia to intervene. He tries to fight her, but he's no Rock Lee, so he uses a racial slur instead, and she ends up clocking him. But for some reason in the morning, she ends up being cast as the villain in all the papers. The thing is, this entire confrontation was filmed from multiple angles, so despite the video evidence and the fact that there was underage drinking at this party, somehow Nubia gets labeled as the aggressor, even though he called her a racial slur and punched her first. It's all pretty unbelievable. I get he's rich and well connected, but somehow the entire narrative is in his favor, even on social media. Plus this is only, 6 hours later? You'd think a rich kid behaving this way at a party would make his family look bad. Later there's a protest being held for the boy that was shot by the police before the comic started, and the kid actually shows up to confront them, claiming everything that happened at the party was the result of liquor, and he didn't want them to get the wrong idea. But Nubia and her friends call him out for being disingenuous, and tell him to get lost. So he really loses it and throws bricks and even a Molotov cocktail at the cops, causing the protest to devolve into chaos, resulting in at least 2 people shot. And then he brings a gun to school and targets Nubia's friend, the one he had a crush on. Oftentimes these kind of characters are very underhanded. They would do anything to keep their power and prestige, but this guy's totally blatant about his harassment and even openly commits crimes. I know they're trying to make a point, but I think it would have benefited their argument more if they had been more realistic in their storytelling. All the stereotypes aren't helping their argument either. Everything is just so heavy-handed and lacking in nuance, and it's really not working in the end. Then there was the store clerk back during the robbery at the beginning of the book. After Nubia throws the ATM at the bad guy, the clerk assumes that she's one of them, but that just doesn't add up. She saw the perpetrators, they threatened her directly, and they were both wearing ski masks. Why would Nubia keep her face uncovered if she was part of it? They claim that it was because she was surrounded by money, but the money was all over the floor, and there were lots of kids there. None of it comes off as believable. Overall, this book wanted to send a message, and that message ended up coming before everything else, including reintroducing Nubia to DC and new readers. The book is trying to say that Nubia's biggest problem is racism, but this book is so over-exaggerated, and there's a lot of issues that Nubia is facing that are just ignored. They took everything that was unique about her and stripped it away. Everything about her being an Amazon and being kidnapped by Ares and being Wonder Woman's twin sister is basically glossed over. That's not the only thing this book glosses over. This town clearly has a serious crime problem, and when they do talk about it, it's exclusively through the issue of racism and police brutality. Nobody likes corrupt cops, and nobody wants corrupt cops on the police force. But this book seems to suggest that if it weren't for racism, all these problems would be solved, and that racism is the only problem, or at least the single biggest problem. Like when Nubia and her friends bring up the shooting over the weekend, they're very casual about it. In fact, her guy friend isn't even sure which incident incident they're talking about. So there were multiple incidents? It sounds like this happens so often it's just been accepted. There doesn't seem to be any street-level superheroes who are fighting the crime here, and Diana's a terrible twin sister who doesn't seem to care what Nubia is actually going through. Not to mention her parents aren't doing any training with her, and they're just putting up with all this crime too, despite one of them being an Amazon. This book focuses so much on racism that it's ignoring any other problems and solutions that are pretty obvious. At the end of the book, her Amazon mom finally decides that maybe she'll teach Nubia a thing or two about the Amazons, and all it took was 17 years and her daughter to go through 2 active shooting events. This book is really messy, and it's trying to handle very serious topics, but it's just not mature about it. It's so cynical and bleak. So those were our thoughts. What do you guys think? Leave a comment down below, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, we really appreciate it. And before we go, we'd like to give a shout out to our members: Caleb Nelson, Stutania, Tyrant Carnivore, Adam K, Shiny Orc Boy, Taylor Ramirez, The Rabbit Mancer, Dash Hound, Haley Kosheva, Raythulu, Hunter Rose, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, and Kopitio Bozinski. Thank you all so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. That helps us out a lot too. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye everyone. Bye guys.